Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Sally Baudet. Our top stories. A brighter forecast for the British economy. The ruling Conservatives hope better financial data will boost their flagging election prospects.
Our other headlines, the former boss of Britain's Post Office is accused of talking absolute rubbish. She's been testifying at the public inquiry into Britain's biggest miscarriage of justice.
Lifting the bonnet on motor racing. US lawmakers want President Biden to launch an antitrust investigation into Formula One.
And Israel's war cabinet convenes an emergency meeting to respond to the International Court of Justice's call to halt its assault on Rafah.
Britain's economy is expected to be a dominant issue in July's general election. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak insists the country's finances have turned a corner, a claim the opposition Labour Party disputes. The Prime Minister announced the date of the election in a week of good news on the fiscal front.
The International Monetary Fund says the UK economy is heading for a soft landing. The fund raised its forecast for GDP growth this year from 0.5% to 0.7%. UK inflation figures show a 2.3 fall in April. That's sitting slightly above the 2% target, so some good news for the economy, which may have been a factor in Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's calling of that general election. Meanwhile, the UK energy regulator, Ofgem, revealed the average annual household energy bill is set to fall slightly, but a continuing cost of living squeeze combined with rather gloomy weather has dampened retail spending, which across the UK fell by 2.3% in April, which follows a fall of 0.2% in March. So with the economy set to come under enormous scrutiny for the next month and a half or so, where does all of this leave us? Vicky Price is an international economist and business consultant. Vicky, what's your reading of these figures and the landscape for the UK general election?
There is definitely some improvement in the underlying growth of the UK economy, but you're absolutely right. The retail sales figures came in as a bit of a shock. The consumer is still quite careful. They are, of course, not going out shopping when the weather is bad, and we had an awful lot of rain. That tends to happen, so it affects figures. They're not seasonally adjusted, which means that they can go up and down very significantly depending on what's happening outside. But it's also interesting that online sales, although they represented a much bigger percentage of the retail spending that happened in the last month, they still fell. So it's not as if people just sat there and bought things, but they probably were booking their holidays instead to go to a place where it doesn't rain very much. But it is quite an important part of the economy, and the fact that it didn't do very well is a concern about what may be happening in this quarter. And it's really quite interesting because you mentioned the fact that forecasts have been revised upwards, which is good news, I think, for the incumbent government. In other words, they can claim that things are improving, but we had the IMF up its forecast. We had pretty good growth in the first quarter of 0.6%, but if retail sales don't pick up as we had hoped they might do, then perhaps the second quarter isn't going to be as good as perhaps people have been hoping would be the case.
Different voters vote for different things, that goes without saying, but generally speaking, how important is the economy when voters go to the polls?
It's quite significant, but of course there are two things about this. There is no doubt that real wages going up mean that people feel a little bit more confident. We've seen consumer confidence improve. We've seen minimum wages going up quite significantly, so people's pockets will be having a little bit more money in them. So I think that's positive. It improves how they may be feeling. But there is an interesting conundrum about this. If you look at the previous elections, if things go well, then people are more prepared to risk it and go for a different party. So it's not always the case that the economy doing well is going to help the government that's in place right now. So at present, of course, what is happening is that the opinion polls are telling us that people are not very happy with what's been going on for some time now, and therefore they might vote for a change. And nevertheless, there is no doubt again that the Conservatives and Labour are focusing very much their entire campaigns on the economy. So it will be important whether people have so far taken enough notice or not. The next 6 weeks, it's going to be all about that.
Let's talk about the day after then. Whoever wins the UK election, will voters really see much difference whether it's a Labour or Conservative administration in power afterwards? Isn't the economic inheritance the same?
Yes, unfortunately. Labour isn't going to have, if they do get elected, an awful lot of room for manoeuvre because the fiscal side is pretty bad. Yes, of course, one is borrowing a bit less now than was the case before, but there's still a big issue of needing to continue to borrow. And then, of course, debt, which is still going up. So if you follow the fiscal rules, we have debt to GDP ratio of about 100%, just under it. The fiscal rules say it should be coming down over the next 5 years. There is not enough headroom to do anything much, so the Labour Party has already been talking about taxing various bits a bit more and redistributing, but in reality they're not going to raise a lot of money, so there is concern that public services whose quality has been declining for quite some time may not get the boost they need. So it is not going to be, I think, a fantastic period during which any government can say, right now we can do an awful lot about the economy and boosting growth, because their ability to do so is going to be quite limited.
Vicky, we'll talk much more in the coming weeks during the campaign. For the moment, thank you very much. Vicky Pryce, the international economist.
Now, Germany's GDP expanded slightly in the first 3 months of the year with a 0.2% quarterly rise. German authorities have attributed the jump to an increase in construction investment and foreign trade. But despite lower inflation, Germans aren't spending more, those figures falling 0.4% on the previous quarter. Japan's inflation rate fell for the second consecutive month in April, easing pressure on the central bank to raise interest rates. Core inflation, which includes energy but not food, slowed to 2.2%. That's a drop from the March rate of 2.6%. And Norway's sovereign wealth fund has become the latest investor in ExxonMobil to say it will vote against the re-election of the oil firm's director, Jay Hooley. This is a protest at the company's lawsuit against two shareholder groups who want Exxon to cut greenhouse emissions. The fund is the biggest investor yet to come out against the legal action by the company.
Tesla has cut the production of its best-selling Model Y electric car at its Shanghai plant. Output stood at 50,000 cars in March, falling to just over 35,000 in April, a substantial cut in production on the previous year. It's thought this move is aimed at addressing weakening demand for the US automaker's model in China. More than 2,000 workers at Samsung Electronics in South Korea have been protesting in the capital Seoul, demanding fairer pay. Unions also want performance-based bonuses to be more transparent and an extra day of holiday. Negotiations have resumed with further talks scheduled for the 28th of May. The tech giant Google is reportedly planning to make its Pixel smartphones in India. The electronics manufacturer Foxconn is expected to manufacture the phones at an existing facility in the state of Tamil Nadu. This comes as global manufacturers look to diversify their supply chains outside China.
Now, it's the world's most prestigious motor racing competition, drawing millions of television viewers. The company behind Formula One has a market cap of over $16 billion. Former world champion Mario Andretti wants to get his team into the race and his car on the grid, but he says he's being kept out. Let's talk to John Terrett in New York. Hello, John. Yes. With big situations like this, I always wonder, if it's money behind it all or if it's personal.
Oh, this is America. It's all about money, kiddo. Don't kid yourself. It's always, always, at the political level or the sporting level or the business level, it's always about money. Look, Formula One is taking a hold here in America. I remember I think it was 2011, they had one just close to where I live in New Jersey, around Weehawken, overlooking the city of New York, and that was in 2011, so that's well over 10 years ago now. And then it really got a hold last November, and it will do again this November when they took over the Strip in Las Vegas. So everybody was racing around the casinos in Las Vegas, and the finishing line was actually on the famous Las Vegas Strip. And so Formula One, as you know, is, I suppose, a little bit more exciting than what we have here. NASCAR is the big motorsport here. That stands for the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing. And they race, I suppose you'd call them ordinary cars, really, like Chevy Camaros and Ford Mustangs and Toyota Camrys around a circular track. Americans love that. But they're warming to Formula One and the chicanes, things like that, where you've got to slow down and you come up a fast stretch and then speed up again. It's all very, very exciting. Now, Formula One is owned here, as you rightly say, by Liberty Media, which is a massive, massive media organization. And only in April, I remember reporting on this program, that Liberty Media bought MotoGP, which is essentially the motorcycling equivalent of what we're talking about. Well, now today, NBC Television has begun reporting that there is a clash of personalities going on at the highest level in Formula One. They have 10 teams, and a man called Mario Andretti, who's a really, really fast man. He's one of only about 3 in the world to win at Formula One level, IndyCar level, World Sports Car Championship level, and NASCAR. So he's really fast, this guy, Mario Andretti. He's an American, and he wants his team, which is called Andretti Global, to be the 11th team in Formula One. And Liberty Media and Formula One are saying, thanks for the offer, but no thanks. And there's been a lot of back and forth over many months. But now we're told, according to NBC, at the Miami Grand Prix, which took place on the weekend of the 5th of May, there was a real ding-dong bust-up between the head of Liberty Media and Mario Andretti, in which the head of Liberty Media said, I will do everything I can to keep Michael Andretti, that's your son, out of Formula One. Well, that's not very nice, is it? Well, the thing is, there's a twist to this as well, because it turns out that Mario Andretti, the father, and members of the Andretti team turned up at Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C. recently, and joined members of the Judiciary Committee to launch an investigation into whether or not Formula One / Liberty Media operates as a cartel, as a monopoly. And they say, the politicians on Capitol Hill, that F1 has come to America, it's accepted all the access to the giant and lucrative marketing facilities here, but has in fact failed to share the spoils. So there you go. We wait to see what happens. We'll monitor it closely, but it's a real old battle at the highest level of motorsport in the world.
Yeah, certainly sounds like a lot of drama. So it's Friday. I know you've still got a few hours of trading left, but if you look back at the week, how's it gone?
Yes. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that, Sal. I do have about 5 hours left, actually. Thank you very much indeed. When you're having a nice cool glass of Chablis or something, I'll still be at work. But anyway, don't worry about that. So today the big story really for the whole week was NVIDIA. We just can't get away from NVIDIA. Earnings have beat, revenue have beat, data center was a beat, 10-for-1 stock split. Most importantly, they said, look, we are not going to fulfill our back catalogue of orders until the middle of next year. So that means they're on course to have a great year ahead, and they fulfilled pretty much every promise that Wall Street was hoping for. As a result, their shares were up about 10% when the news of this earnings came out. They were up 9% yesterday, and this morning they're ahead by almost 1%. And it's amazing because it is 1 year almost to the day since we realized the impact of NVIDIA in the world of AI and microchips. Now, they became a $1 trillion company 1 year ago, pretty much to the day. And since that time, we now know that AI is going to play a big part, not only in chips, but technology and green energy and the military and health and education. In other words, there is a workflow revolution coming. And Jason Huang, who runs the company, said that he thought it was akin to the Industrial Revolution. Well, the thing about the Industrial Revolution was it took 100 years, and there were 2 of them. This revolution is going to be completed next Thursday. We're all going to be out of work next Thursday, all of us. This is the problem with AI. It is happening so very, very fast, and that's why NVIDIA is the focus, why we keep talking about it, and we'll go on talking about it as well. Now, having said that briefly, yesterday was a big sell-off on Wall Street because they were panicking about interest rates again. This morning, they go, forget that. We're back on course. Everything's rosy, and it's the beginning of a major holiday, the Memorial Day holiday, so we'll all be off on Monday, and the Dow is presently ahead by about 118 points.
Well, John Terrett, thank you very much, and you enjoy your long weekend in New York.
Yes, thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Israel vows to bring back all hostages from Gaza as the bodies of 3 more are recovered. We'll be in Tel Aviv.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to immediately halt its offensive in Rafah, calling the humanitarian situation there disastrous.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is convening an emergency meeting in response to the court's order. The ruling from the United Nations Highest Court is only one part of a bigger case brought by South Africa, accusing Israel of genocide in the Gaza conflict.
The court considers that, in conformity with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
Let's talk to our correspondent Will Denslow in The Hague. Will, in real terms, what does this ruling mean?
Well, the ruling really was emphatic, Jamie. 13-2 was the decision from the 15-panel body of the ICJ judges at the Peace Palace behind me. What it means is that they are ordering Israel to immediately cease its military operations in Rafah to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza as well. They're calling on Israel to check in a month's time to ensure it is complying with this ICJ order. They are also demanding that Israel allows unfettered access into Gaza for investigators, for UN officials and the like. And this is a serious significant development from the ICJ, and of course comes as part of a wider probe brought by South Africa into those allegations that Israel has violated the Genocide Convention, a charge that Israel vehemently denies.
Just talk us through some of the steps we might see over the coming days and months following this ruling.
Absolutely. Well, this ruling is legally binding, but it lacks teeth. In other words, Jamie, it's not enforceable. To see a body that perhaps is able to bring some enforcement to this ICJ order, well, that is a matter for the United Nations Security Council. So attention will certainly pivot from here in The Hague to New York. and all eyes will be on whether the Security Council can pass any kind of legally binding resolution. However, there is the considerable matter that involves at least 9 members of the 15-nation panel in New York to go along with it, and also to see no vetoes, namely from Israel's staunchest ally, the United States. There has been strong international reaction, especially when it comes to Rafah in recent weeks, condemnation urging Israel to cease its actions. We've heard some of that rhetoric coming from South Africa's High Commissioner in the United Kingdom, speaking to our colleague Michael Murillier. Let's have a listen.
The way these people of Gaza and West Bank are treated, it's inhumane. I'm taken aback by people who say, oh, no, we're concerned with the aid. We're going to send aid. But at the same time, they're also giving weapons to Israel. And yet again, at the same time, you are creating those conditions by giving weapons to these people who actually kill and maim and murder these people. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
And important to note that Israel condemns the decision from the ICJ. They have maintained that it is complying within the confines of international humanitarian law. They've even accused South Africa of acting as the legal wing of Hamas. They say they are taking steps to protect civilians, but the objective of Israel is to protect its own civilians. They say that the ICJ is essentially failing them. Jamie?
Well, thanks for that. Our correspondent Will Denslow in The Hague.
Let's get more information from Israel. Our correspondent Sam Mednick is in Tel Aviv. Hello, Sam. So what exactly is Israel saying at this point about today's order from the ICJ?
Well, we don't have an official response yet from Israel's government. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, after the announcement, immediately called for a ministerial meeting. He would be in that right now, and we would expect to hear more from him later on. But we have heard from Benny Gantz, a member of the War Cabinet. He said that Israel's campaign was just, that Israel was going to continue fighting, including in Rafah, and continue fighting in accordance with international law. We also heard from a leader of the opposition party, Yair Lapid. He said that this was a moral failure, and said that the ICJ was not connecting the offensive in Rafah with Israel's right to defend itself. Now, it's unlikely this is going to move the needle or change anything on Israel's part. The ICJ doesn't have the mechanism to enforce this. However, it does increase pressure on Israel, and it is already becoming increasingly isolated on the international stage. Already in the last week, there were 2 blows against Israel. 3 European countries unilaterally recognized the Palestinian state, and the International Criminal Court has said it was going to seek arrest warrants for 2 Israeli leaders, including Netanyahu, as well as 3 Hamas officials.
Of course, the reality is hostages are still being held in Gaza, and some grim news. The bodies of 3 more Israeli hostages have been found. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. Some grim news indeed. Today, this was, Israel said on Friday, they found the bodies of 3 male hostages. They have been returned to their families. Now, Israel said that they were killed on October 7th when Hamas attacked Israel, that their bodies were taken into Gaza. And Israel said that due to what it called critical intelligence that it found in Gaza last week, that it was able to locate the bodies, and they were found in Jabalia. Now, this comes less than a week after the bodies of 3 other hostages were also found and taken out of Gaza back to their families. There were about 250 hostages taken on October 7th. Half of them were released in a week-long ceasefire in November, but there's about 100 left, and Israel believes that about 39 of the hostages are dead. And there is growing anger around the country about Israel's government and the handling of the hostage crisis. Just days ago, there was a video released by a forum that supports the families of the hostages. It showed 5 female soldiers on October 7th. As Hamas went into their base, they are bloodied and wounded, and it shows a video of them being dragged into a truck. And that has sparked renewed protests across the country.
Thank you so much for that update from Israel. Sam Mednick there.
Gaza's Al-Aqsa hospital is reported to have run out of fuel, meaning there is now no electricity. Its medical director said patients were being condemned to death. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari is in Gaza.
The situation in the hospital is extremely dire, and the lack to fuel and also medical supplies has been making things worse for the people who are waiting in this hospital. The bed capacity in this hospital is between 188 to 200, and this hospital has 5-folds of that number. Around 650 Palestinians are crowded in this particular area. When you walk down the corridors of the hospital, you see people sleeping on the floor. When you see in the yard people who are moving, you see people who are waiting there, people who are sick, people who are injured, people who are disabled, people who have cast, people who have their children on their lap because they are injured, and they are trying to protect them. The situation is extremely dire. The doctors are suffering because of the fact that they have been trying to fulfill their moral obligation of extending a helping hand to the people. However, they are stuck and trapped in this particular precarious situation where they cannot extend the helping hand to the patients, and where they don't have the medical supplies that are needed to carry out their human mission. So overall, people are suffering, patients are suffering, the overall situation is extremely lacking, and the ones who are bearing the brunt of this are the patients and the injured people, and they are likely to continue suffering. Yesterday, the hospital made a statement that was like save our soul, appeal for the international community, for all those who can help. They were provided with a fuel for 3 days only, and in 3 days they would be again calling for the international community and for the people to save the lives of the people who are already suffering because of the insufficient amount of medical supplies entering Gaza. So it's a recurrent bottleneck and crisis, and it's the life of the people that is on the stake in Gaza, in this hospital and in many other hospitals in Gaza Strip.
That's Akram al-Satari in Gaza. Now, hundreds of people are feared to have been killed after a landslide buried a village in a remote area of Papua New Guinea. Part of a mountain is reported to have collapsed on the village of Keo Kalam. Videos on social media show bodies being pulled from the rubble at the site, which lies 600 kilometers northwest of the capital, Port Moresby. Emergency teams have been dispatched to the area.
Officials on the Spanish island of Majorca say a deadly restaurant collapse was probably caused by outdated construction methods and overcrowding. The Medusa Beach Club in Palma had opened a newly built rooftop bar a day before this accident. 4 people died when the structure collapsed, with 16 others injured.
Police in New Caledonia shot and killed a man a day after a visit by French President Emmanuel Macron aimed at calming tensions on the Pacific island. Now, the man was part of a group who allegedly attacked officers. It brings the death toll from recent riots to 7. Locals have been angered by voting reforms proposed by Paris, which President Macron has now agreed to pause.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin is in Belarus for talks with President Alexander Lukashenko. Discussions are expected to focus on security and joint tactical nuclear weapons exercises. This visit is part of a round of foreign trips by Putin as he begins his 5th term in office.
G7 finance ministers are trying to reach agreement on a US plan to provide loans to Ukraine, which would be backed by $300 billion of frozen Russian assets. Finance ministers from 7 of the world's leading economies are meeting in Italy. They're also discussing further responses to China's industrial policies. Our correspondent Giles Gibson joins us from Rome. Hello, Giles. So is there a general consensus on using Russia's frozen assets to help Ukraine?
I think general consensus is the right word in terms of what these G7 finance ministers are moving towards. But really, we don't expect there to be any sort of a real detailed agreement with all the I's dotted and the T's crossed in terms of how to leverage these frozen Russian assets. We heard from the German finance minister, Christian Lindner, on the way into the meeting on day 1, saying that there are still many legal and technical issues that need to be resolved, and a US official under Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, saying that they are hoping to make some progress towards sort of agreeing a principle here, a structure if you like, but not actually the sort of fine detail of an agreement. Just to kind of give you some background here, what we've seen over the last few months or so is the US and Canada on one side, who at the start of this really wanted to see these frozen Russian assets simply confiscated and handed over to the Ukrainians. And then on the other side of the debate, there's really mostly the Europeans who've been very concerned about the potential to set a dangerous legal precedent here in terms of confiscating the assets of a sovereign country. What it looks like we're moving towards is some sort of a middle ground where a loan would be issued, potentially through the auspices of the World Bank, that loan backed up by the profits of these $300 billion of frozen Russian assets, and potentially we could see an actual agreement, a structure in place by the time the end of the G7 Leaders Summit comes around in around 3 weeks' time.
G7 also saying it wants to show a united front over China's industrial policies. What might that look like?
Well, we could see a united front in terms of messaging, but not so much in terms of policy. So heading into this meeting, we heard from the US government that their new higher tariffs on Chinese goods are going to kick in on the 1st of August. Those tariffs targeting everything from electric vehicles to batteries that go into EVs, as well as medical devices. Now, the Europeans in particular are also a little bit concerned, or very concerned, about any sort of push for there to be coordinated tariffs. There is really no chance of that taking place whatsoever. We heard from the German finance minister again saying that trade wars are all about losing, that you can't win them. So I think what we'll see is some tough language when it comes to the impact of Chinese imports into these economies, but really nothing in terms of, big policy shifts. Just finally, there is this proposal from France and Brazil as part of the wider G20 group for there to be a coordinated global tax on billionaires, but we understand that the US is not yet weighing in behind that, is not giving it support, and also there are other members around the table who are saying, look, we agreed this agreement a couple of years ago based on a minimum tax threshold for multinationals, and we still haven't actually implemented that. So it looks like that proposal for a billionaire's tax is not going to make much progress, at least at this meeting.
All right, thank you very much. Giles Gibson coming to us from Rome.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, too far for the far right. Germany's AfD is expelled from the European Parliament grouping over Nazi comments.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen accent.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Sally Burdett. Our top stories. Israel's war cabinet convenes an emergency meeting to respond to the International Court of Justice's call to halt its assault on Rafah. A brighter forecast for the British economy. The ruling Conservatives hope better financial data will boost their flagging election prospects.
The former boss of Britain's Post Office, Paula Venables, has been accused of talking absolute rubbish on her final day of questioning at the public inquiry into the scandal. Between 1999 and 2015, more than 900 postmasters were prosecuted and convicted for theft, resulting from errors caused by faulty software. A law quashing those convictions has now been approved by Parliament. Paula Venables was told she had given a craven, self-serving account of her actions. Well, let's talk to Tom Hedges, a former sub-postmaster who was wrongfully convicted. Tom, welcome. We have to cram a lifetime into a short time, but in brief, what was the personal and professional impact on the wrongful conviction that you endured?
Well, good evening. Yeah, I mean, absolute ruination of my life. It's about 15 years ago since I was prosecuted, and I went from living a fairly comfortable, nice existence to being washed up and almost flushed away by a bullying post office who took me to court, prosecuted me, and it meant that my business almost went bust, but we did manage to just save it a little bit. But I came within a hair's breadth of going bankrupt, and the stigma never leaves you. I was 58 at the time, and trying to get another job at 58 is a hard enough job, but stick a criminal conviction on, and it proved completely impossible.
Tom, the former boss of the Post Office, was robustly cross-examined this week. If you had been asking those questions, what would you have asked her?
I just... What on earth was she doing? She must have been asleep on the watch. I flippantly commented to somebody today. She must have gone into the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, put her head on the desk and gone to sleep, and then woken up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and gone home. Because so many red flags have been brought out of this inquiry. What was she thinking of?
What do you want to happen to the management of the Post Office during this time, the former management of the Post Office, when this inquiry comes to an end?
Well, I'm fairly certain the Metropolitan Police will be taking a look at all the evidence when the report is finally written at the back end of this year. And I think that they should take a strong look, not only at Paula, because I think she has been singled out as the fall guy here, but there are many others who also are culpable and need seriously looking at.
When you look back over these broken years, why do you think this happened?
Reputation. Reputation not only of the Post Office's image as a loved and professional organisation, but also the reputation and images of the various bosses that were in charge over a number of years. And as I said before, it's not just Paula. There are probably a good dozen or more who are equally culpable.
Have you finally got justice?
I'm lucky in that I had my conviction quashed back in 2021. I was one of the first of the 39 cases in the High Court that day. And I'm extremely pleased that the other 900 now, with the passing of this law, joined me. But as far as justice is concerned, it's over 3 years since I got my conviction quashed. And that opened the door for me to claim compensation. And only this week have I managed to lodge that claim because of all the hoops that the Post Office have thrown up in the way of getting to that compensation. So I'm hopeful now that in my personal case, that will be the case. That will come through in the next couple of months. However, there's 900 other people with the result of the law that's just been passed that are now in a similar situation. And it's going to cost the government, ultimately, because the Post Office have no money to pay this, and the government hold 100% of the shares in the Post Office. So it's down to them to pay.
Tom, thank you for sharing your story, and we wish you well. Tom Hedges, former sub-postmaster, talking to us there from Lincolnshire.
To another important probe that released its findings this week here in the UK. From the 1970s to the early 1990s, 30,000 patients in the United Kingdom were given blood contaminated with HIV or hepatitis C. Over 3,000 people have since died. Many more continue to live with serious health issues. This week, an inquiry released its findings into the medical scandal. Our correspondent Jen Copestake reports.
After almost 50 years, finally recognition for victims and families affected by receiving contaminated blood. A 7-volume report, the result of a 6-year inquiry, lays out what it calls the horrifying scale of a cover-up.
Tragically, the infections happened because those in authority, doctors, the blood services and successive governments, did not put patient safety first.
At one school for disabled children, 75 out of 122 pupils died after being treated in the 70s and 80s with HIV-contaminated blood products for haemophilia. The report provides evidence of deliberate concealment of wrongdoing, including shredding documents. Patients reporting symptoms of serious illness were often ignored until it was too late.
It vindicates my impression that the knowledge was out there. Our government ignored it, couldn't be bothered with it, found it was going to be too expensive. I don't know what their excuses are, but this blatantly in black and white says that they have no excuses, that every person that died from those times on could have been saved.
This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. The people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way. I want to make a wholehearted and unequivocal apology for this terrible injustice.
The government announced that a compensation authority to administer payments to victims and their families would be set up right away, at a cost estimated to be over $13 billion. Danielle Mullen's mother, Marie Cromie, died after receiving a contaminated blood transfusion.
She had 2 liver transplants as a result of it, multiple health complications, endless hospital stays, just took her life away from her and subsequently took her away from us as well.
Danielle says the compensation has arrived too late for her mother, who campaigned for justice up until her death.
They should be ashamed of themselves, disgusted. No amount of apologies or no amount of money is ever going to take away the pain and the suffering for anyone who is still alive or who has passed away. It's not going to bring my mum back to me again.
With the UK now heading for a general election, campaigners are focused on ensuring whoever is elected to lead the next government follows through on the recommendations of the inquiry. Jen Copestake, CGTN.
Germany's far-right AfD party has been given the boost by the European Parliament's far-right group over controversial remarks about the Nazis. This comes after Maximilian Krah, the AfD's lead candidate in the forthcoming Euro elections, told an Italian newspaper that the Nazis' elite SS Guard were not all criminals. Our correspondent Trent Murray is in Berlin. Trent, what's the background to this decision?
Well, Jamie, this is a pretty big blow for the Alternative for Deutschland party, given the fact that we are really just days, a bit over 2 weeks away, to those crucial European Union elections. And it all centres around, as you say, a man called Maximilian Krah. Now, he effectively is the top of the ticket here in Germany for the AfD party. And his comments about the SS uniform that he made to the Republican newspaper really comes off the back of several other controversies that he and the party have seemed to have attracted in recent weeks, including allegations of corruption and a lot of backlash, both in Germany from their political opponents, but seemingly now also concern and backlash from some of their, I suppose you could say, political bedfellows in other parts of Europe. The AfD sits with other far-right parties inside the European Parliament. They effectively sit there as a group, quite literally, on the benches of the European Parliament in what is known as the Identity and Democracy for Europe grouping. And what they have said is that these latest comments are just too much now for them, and they've effectively shown the door to their German political family that they are now saying that they will have to sit on their own. Marine Le Pen really quite crucial in all of this. We know she told French media overnight that these latest comments show that the AfD just goes from one scandal to the next. And what a lot of analysts are saying is that it would appear that a lot of this is being done to try and create some distance for her party in France, for a domestic French political audience between her party and what is seemingly being viewed as an increasingly radical far right here in Germany in the AfD.
So what's next for the AfD ahead of the European election?
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess what's next is that crucial voting day. I mean, we will have to see whether all of this scandal will hurt them at the ballot box. They certainly, right now, are riding quite high in the polls, and they are quietly confident that they will do very, very well. We should stress that Maximilian Krah, the man at the centre of all of this, he has been pulled back by the party now from doing any frontline campaigning. They effectively don't want him out creating any more controversies before polling day, but it's too late for them to remove him. He is now technically on the ballot at the top of that voting form, and so he very likely will win another term in the European Parliament. But then what happens next for the AfD and its relationship with sort of parties in Europe that share its ideology, we will just sort of have to wait and see. They likely will continue to be a fairly strong force in Parliament. Their numbers will likely be needed in order to try and get legislation passed if there is a right majority in the Parliament. We, of course, just have to wait and see, but it certainly is a big blow for them, effectively having their political siblings, if you will, in other parts of Europe saying you're just too radical even for us. One would imagine voters here in Germany will be paying attention to that.
Trent, thank you for that. Our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, keeping your kids away from the small screen. How China is limiting children's access to smartphones and tablets.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. China has introduced a number of measures to crack down on the amount of time children spend in front of a screen. Sedentary behaviour in children, of course, we know this can lead to health problems later in life. A new UK study says the measures appear to be working. A little earlier, I spoke to the lead author.
So the regulation started in 2021. Different components of the regulation roll out in phases, but broadly there are three components. The first part of the regulation is that it regulates or limits when and for how long online gaming business can provide access to children. And second, they regulate the amount of homework that teachers can assign to children of different age groups. And finally, they also limit when profit-making tutoring business can provide lessons.
Did you find it worked better than encouraging parents to limit screen time or encouraging children to get outside?
That is a brilliant question. So traditionally, intervention approach primarily focused on education, so educating the children or the parents and expecting them to make the change. And we know this doesn't work. That's because people's behavior are shaped and influenced by the environment they live in. So by improving the healthiness level of the environment, and people are more likely to change behavior and the behavior can be sustained. And we know that as mothers, our children may like to spend time on TV or digital devices. I can say to my kids, like, no more than 1 hour a day, but they can say, well, my best friend spent 2 hours a day. So this is the social or peer pressures making behavior change difficult.
The study does show that it does translate to children then deciding, okay, well, let me go and do something more physical, which is very interesting. But what do we do with this information? Because I'm not sure this is something that would work in Europe, where we're more against regulation. What do we then do with this information for the good of our children?
Yeah, actually, I'm currently building an international research consortium involved WHO and many European member states. And we believe that the question is not whether government outside China, like, for example, in the UK, should consider regulatory intervention. The question is about how. How can we maximize the public acceptabilities, feasibilities? So we are actually looking at the existing environment, or say the political systems, the regulatory or legal systems, and public's perception. How can we work with different stakeholders to make this happen? And what kind of secondary behaviors in Europe, for example, should be targeted, because all countries are different. In China, maybe it's the online games and homework that should be targeted, but maybe here should be social media, for example. So I believe the message is not about whether we can transfer this directly to other countries, but how can other countries thinking about regulatory intervention in general and find a way to tailor this to their own settings to help the local people. So it's about tailoring and understand local needs. And we are actually very looking forward to sharing more funding with people around the world, because we are working at international level in terms of regulatory intervention beyond China.
Now, whenever we talk about how clever artificial intelligence is, it seems to get more clever by the time you finish your sentence.
Our correspondent, Mark New, looks at the rapid advances in AI voice capabilities and how they could be life-changing.
And now the big news.
Just this month, OpenAI introduced ChatGPT 4o, which has AI voice capabilities that seem like science fiction a few years ago.
Byte was a curious robot. Always exploring.
Started this story, but I want a little bit more emotion in your voice, a little bit more drama.
Got it. Let's add some drama. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours, there was a robot named Byte.
No, ChatGPT. I really want maximal emotion, like maximal expressiveness, much more than you were doing before.
Understood. Let's amplify the drama. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours.
The very next day, Google showed how its AI engine Gemini can run a science lesson with 2 AI hosts.
And that, of course, means we have to talk about Sir Isaac Newton and his 3 laws of motion.
Ah, yes, the foundation for understanding how objects move and interact.
The AI hosts can take questions and adjust lessons on the fly.
Hold on, we have a question. What's up, Josh?
Yeah, can you give my son Jimmy a basketball example?
Hey, Jimmy! That's a fantastic idea. Basketball is actually a great way to visualize force and motion. Let's break it down.
Okay, so first, imagine a basketball just sitting there on the court. It's not moving, right?
If nobody told you that there's an AI involved in the experiment or in this kind of discussion, you never distinguish it, because the emotions here can be controlled, you know, sarcasm, funny, comedy, where somebody has to be serious about it. And they understand that from the flow of the discussion that people are changing their mode. You are looking at the new AI that's going to get smarter and smarter and smarter.
By using computer vision, ChatGPT 4o can even detect the emotions expressed on your face. San Jose State professor Ahmad Banafas